Good afternoon and welcome to this next episode of Governance Dialogues. My name is Alissa Kole and I'm the Managing Director of Governance Center. And for those of you who have joined this program previously, it's my pleasure to welcome you back for what I think will be a fascinating conversation on investor stewardship. And indeed, for those of you who have dialed to our previous conversations, you would know that investor stewardship is a topic that we've been discussing naturally in the last few episodes, especially in light of the COVID crisis. And in one of our previous episodes, just a few weeks ago, we had conversations with ICGN's policy director, George Dallas, ICGN being the international umbrella organization representing the interests of international institutional investors with assets under management of around $50 trillion. So quite a number of conversations we've had on this program focused on the issue of stewardship. And in today's episode, what I would like to do is discuss a specific episode of stewardship and a specific episode of engagement by one of the largest and most prominent institutional investors worldwide. And for this reason, I've invited a representative of the California State Teachers Retirement System, which is a fund in the United States with about, if I'm not mistaken, $290 billion under management and about 100 million subscribers, so quite a sizable organization, which is currently sort of in discussions or an active engagement phase, as we'll hear from them in a minute, around the Exxon Mobil case, which has been going on for about 2 years. And that said, I would like to introduce and welcome to this program Aeisha Mastagni, who's representing CalSTRS today in this conversation. And I very much welcome you on this program and look forward to hearing from you on this fascinating engagement.
Thank you, Alissa. Happy to be here.
Thank you. So it's a pleasure to have you here. Let me perhaps begin this conversation by saying a few words about the organization and perhaps your role in leading this very interesting and important campaign and this conversation with Exxon Mobil. So as I mentioned, CalSTRS is about a 100-year-old organization by now with about 100 members and $290 billion of under management, and you have a prominent role in corporate engagement and conversations around executive compensation, and if I also understand in conversations with regulatory authorities around governance and the kind of change that you're looking to see as an investor. So, and also I know from having spoken to you previously, but also from your work that you've been also leading similar initiatives at working with other institutional investors at CalPERS, and you're also quite engaged with the various associations, investor associations in the United States. So yes, obviously you're quite on the forefront of this debate. You know, about 2 months back, if I'm not mistaken, you've put out a statement, and I just wanted to quote from it because I think, you know, I hardly could find words that are as sort of descriptive or strong as what you've put out on the Exxon Mobil campaign. The reported loss of $22 billion in 2020 demonstrates a continued erosion of shareholder value, and that incremental changes are not enough to restore investor confidence and position the company for a global energy transition, and that piecemeal investments in carbon capture don't demonstrate a long-term energy transition. And so clearly this is a subject that you're passionate about and you're engaged on, and you've been having this conversation, if I'm not mistaken, for the last 2 years. So if I may ask you to perhaps start this this conversation by saying a little bit more about the kind of change that you're looking to see, and a few words about sort of the history of this campaign.
Sure. No, happy to do that. And thanks again for having me. Alissa, like you said at the beginning, you know, CalSTRS is a 100-year-old institution, and we have a promise to the teachers of California to ensure that they have a secure retirement for them and for their families. And as an active long-term shareholder, we have a responsibility to mitigate risk inside our portfolio and promote investor confidence in the companies in which we invest. And so we take all of our stewardship activities very, very seriously, because we do think the stewardship is a way to mitigate that risk and add value to a portfolio. We established, a couple years ago, what we call our stewardship priorities. That's because there's no shortage of issues that we can tackle, but we've sort of centered on four main things. The first is corporate and market accountability. You mentioned all of our activities with the regulators. We want to ensure that we have well-functioning, efficient markets in which to operate, where we have the shareholder rights we need to be able to influence and effectuate change. So that's the first one. The second, which obviously is very core to the Exxon Mobil campaign, and that's around the low carbon transition. We're focusing on public policy. We're wanting to make sure we have resilient companies that will survive and thrive in the low carbon transition. The third is around what we call board effectiveness. As investors or shareholders, we hire, and vote on those board members that we think have the skill sets that can really oversee long-term strategies inside the companies. That's another core tenet of the Exxon campaign. And last but not least, and this is a little bit different, it's core to the institution we are, given some of the gun violence that's happened in the United States, and that's around responsible firearms. And so we do focus on that a bit, just given our beneficiary base. But back to what you were saying around the Exxon campaign, we've had a long engagement with Exxon Mobil. This is a company that, in the past has not been the most receptive to investor engagement. For years and years, they had a history where they said that their policy was that board members didn't meet with shareholders. The last couple of years, they have, amended that policy. And there's lots of times where we have gotten a chance to speak with board members, but in many of those conversations, not just with CalSTRS, but with some of our other fellow institutional investors, it's really management that's still speaking. This is also a company for us where, some of the other tools that we have at our disposal that can help effectuate change haven't achieved the results that we want. Things like collaborative engagements like Climate Action 100 that have achieved commitments on carbon reductions from other companies haven't been successful at Exxon Mobil. Things like shareholder proposals, I know those are used in the United States quite a bit. This was, a couple of years ago, there was a shareholder proposal about asking the company to talk about climate risk. The proposal was all but basically ignored by the company. And then last year, CalSTRS voted against the entire board of directors because we just didn't feel like they were being responsive to investor needs. They weren't being responsive to, what we saw as the risk that was facing this company. And once again, our increased shareholder votes against board members was basically ineffective. And so, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry I just want to interject on this engagement. First, I think your comments also underscore how, in particular on the comments on firearms and specific let's say domestic driven priorities, really underscore different dynamics among, investors, whether,
Yes.
in Europe, obviously where I'm currently sitting, nobody would be engaging in these type of issues, but they are, as you correctly point out, important in the US. But particularly in the Exxon case, you've zoomed in into the board compositions being one of the sort of drivers or one of the concrete levers of governance change that you'd like to affect. And in the last AGM, it was a challenge to actually have your proposal sort of approved, and that is a conversation that I understand you're looking to continue in the May 26 shareholder meeting. So I wonder if you could say a few words around what were some of the challenges and obstacles in having your voice heard the last time, and what you think might have changed in the interim year, whether other investors might be in fact more, let's say, listening to you with more open ears and joining the cause.
I think the big difference is that, last year, because it was a uncontested election, the only thing we could do was vote against those directors that were standing for election at the Exxon Mobil board. This year, we have the choice as investors because engine number one, that's a small startup firm, has proposed a very, the directors that they found as an alternate slate hold the skill sets that we were originally looking for when we were looking at the Exxon Mobil board. And those skill sets include industry expertise. This is a board at Exxon Mobil that, quite frankly, had very limited experience on the board when it came to energy or even oil and gas in particular. The other skill set we were really looking for is, public policy and regulatory experience. In the United States, energy companies, oil and gas companies, they have to be tuned into the public policy and the regulatory environment that's happening in the US. Third, and probably most important, is we wanted individuals that really understood the energy transition and had been involved in those industries that have been transformative. And we wanted a track record of success at those types of companies. And while the Exxon Mobil current set of board members were all very well-respected, successful in their own industries, they were lacking those core skill sets that I just mentioned. And so when Engine One brought this slate of directors to us, that's when we decided that we wanted to back their agenda and their slate of directors. And so that's what we're planning to do. And in fact, we've already voted for their slate of directors for the May 26th meeting.
That's really interesting. And I think what's also a very interesting element of this campaign is that you're in a way backing a slate, as you mentioned, that has originally been kind of on an issue that's originally been identified, so to speak, by a relatively small hedge fund. And I was wondering if you could say a few words around how this, let's say, collaboration or this interest to work together sort of originated at the beginning.
So we were familiar with one of the partners of what is now Engine Number One. Charlie Penner previously had worked at Jana Partners, and they had come to us in the past. They knew we were an active, engaged shareholder, and we had done some other types of engagements, some behind the scenes, some a little more prominent, some listening to this video may be familiar with the Apple campaign that CalSTRS undertook. That was another one that was core to our stewardship beliefs. It was around providing those parental controls for parents on the hardware and software that Apple produces. And I think it was a very, very successful campaign. It didn't go as far as this one in terms of, actually submitting an alternate slate of directors, but it was a very successful campaign. There were others that we did, behind the scenes where we actually were able to effectuate change without making some of our engagements public. And so they had brought this idea to us with Exxon. And as I laid out earlier, we as shareholders, we have a whole spectrum of various tools that we can use at our disposal. And they take a variety and different levels of resources. And for us, we can use our proxy voting, we can use shareholder proposals, we can use collaborative engagements, we can use one-on-one engagements with the company. And last but not least is what we're calling this concept of activist stewardship. And that's what's come to light here at Exxon Mobil, because we really think that, the board of directors, they represent our interest inside that boardroom. And we need to ensure that we have, the collective set of skill sets that we think can really help oversee that strategic directions of a company, especially given, the changing environment that we're operating in currently.
Yeah, I think there are a number of interesting points you're making in terms of the mechanisms that are available to you that you could have used or have used probably in this campaign and in other campaigns. And it's indeed quite rare for large institutional investors like yourselves to sort of go with a public campaign and engage and suggest that the board needs to be removed. I mean, there are some cases where institutional investors, currently I commented, for example, on this Credit Suisse case where shareholders are calling for the removal of the chair of the risk committee. And so there are sort of changes that are being lobbied for, but generally perhaps less significant than the one that you're advocating currently. And one question that obviously comes to mind is what might be, I mean, obviously you've had conversations with fellow institutional investors on this issue, and I wonder if you could say a few words around arguments that are being used to say, where institutional investors in Exxon are actually perhaps in disagreement with you. What are the kinds of things that they consider, or the kinds of arguments that they're raising?
Well, I think part of it is the company, Exxon, they have acknowledged that there needs to be change. And I think you see that through some of the recent additions to their own board. They've added 3 new board members. Some could say that, those are adding some of the skill sets that they think and believe are necessary. What we really think is that there needs to be a critical mass of change at this company, just in order to really drive change and make this company resilient for the next, 50, 100 years. And so that's why we're supporting this alternate slate, is we really think there needs to be that change in order, because the world's changing. Right.
And on sort of just stepping a little bit away from the Exxon campaign, are there other companies in the oil and gas sector, or perhaps in your portfolio more generally, that you're engaging, let's say, with the same level of enthusiasm or intensity, where you believe change is equally needed? Or is Exxon in your strategy, or in your engagement strategy, as sort of I don't know if the cherry on the cake is the right expression, but in a way, where focus specifically because you think there's a particular value creation opportunity being lost.
Yes, I think, as I said earlier, there's sort of the spectrum of tools we have available, and this is one that requires a lot of resources, obviously, and a partner like Engine Number One, who brought these candidates to us, that we couldn't normally do on our own. And so it is a unique partnership. It is a unique situation. And with a company that, we believe we all want the same things, whether it's Exxon Mobil management, the board, us as investors. We want this company to be successful when it comes to the energy transition. And we want this company to, have a better oversight of its capital allocation practices, its compensation, ensuring that it's aligned with shareholders. These are all things that we think this new collective set of skills that this alternate slate has can bring to the table and really help improve the value and mitigate risk at this company. And so, obviously this is still playing out. We're going to wait and see what happens at the May 26th meeting. We're hoping that we're successful. But, this is probably something that, we could only maybe do, one company a year. That's not to say that we don't have other engagements that we're currently undertaking. They just don't have the same level of resource intensity that this one does.
It is a clearly impressive campaign, and which is why I've invited you to speak on this issue. And indeed, many other investors, I'm thinking of Norges, for example, on the coal issues. They've just said, okay, we'll divest, and that's obviously another option that's we all know available to institutional investors. Even the larger ones have taken this route in these particular cases. And I wonder if you could say a word or two, if this is an option you even consider, perhaps not for Exxon, but in other situations where you think, okay, it's a hopeless scenario. We can't get to the governance objectives or the kind of performance objectives that we're looking for. We're happy to throw in the towel, so to speak. Is that something that you consider as an investor?
Yeah. Well, and we have divested from various industries in the past. We talked about, the firearms at the beginning. We have divested from firearms manufacturers. This was a piece of the portfolio where our beneficiary group felt very passionate about and didn't feel comfortable having those types of investments as part of the portfolio. That being said, our board of directors at CalSTRS, are represented, they represent the collective body of California educators, and they have to go through a process given their fiduciary responsibility. And so at CalSTRS, we have, and it's funny, I don't even like calling it a divestment policy, because really what it talks about is, we must engage and we must use our stewardship tools that we have available. We must exhaust all of those before we actually divest. And so there have been instances where we've divested. I think, tobacco is one of them. We have divested of coal investments and of the firearms manufacturers. So it's a last resort tactic for us, because, we at CalSTRS know that divesting doesn't solve the social problem. And in fact, a lot of times, if we divest our shares, there's no shortage of buyers. And so they often go to someone that may care less about these issues than we do. And so we want companies like Exxon to help be part of the solution, because we know we're going to still need oil and gas for the foreseeable future, but we want to make sure the company's positioning itself for the change that is inevitably coming.
It's interesting as to what you're mentioning in terms of your role, and it's almost sort of, opens this broader debate about the social, let's say, role or impact of institutional investors, what can really be expected of them. And of course, divesting is perhaps the easier route, not necessarily more financially lucrative, but maybe easier in some circumstances. But what you're referring to is this kind of broader role or responsibility that some investors like yourselves feel in terms of making changes, policy changes or societal changes to the sort of social issues that you feel passionate about. And that's certainly a message that echoes with me, because I've worked a lot also with Muslim countries, Middle Eastern countries, where certain sectors are just not on the radar screen. Whether we're talking about pork or other sort of other sectors like meat in the meat industry that are considered off limits altogether. So they wouldn't even invest in it in the first place. It wouldn't be divested. It would just not be even considered. So it's interesting how different investors play with that notion of social acceptable and social change. But for the purpose of our time is sort of running up, and I'm very grateful for the time you've allocated to this program. Just last sort of a comment, if I may ask from you, on the kinds of sort of message in 3 sentences that you would like to send to other shareholders who will be participating in the May 26 AGM.
Yeah. And I'm glad you sort of ended this on, talking about some of the societal issues. And I just want to emphasize that, everything we do at CalSTRS is to secure retirement for the teachers of California. So we wouldn't be investing the resources that we're investing in this campaign if it weren't because we believe that we could have a commensurate sort of value proposition on the other side of this. We think this is a company that, with the proper capital allocation, with the proper alignment of incentives, and with the right board of directors, can really position this company to be profitable and a value driver for the future. So that's why we're doing that. And we're hoping to earn the investor support at the May 26th meeting.
Well, thank you so much, Aeisha, for joining us. I know it's early your time, but it's really a timely conversation, I think, given the AGM date. And I do route for your cause behind the scenes, and do hope that we'll have a possibility to speak again, perhaps in a couple of months' time, where you would have had some news on this front, and perhaps discussing with you your other campaigns at CalSTRS. But for the purposes of today's conversation, I'd like to thank you for your time and thank our audience for joining us for this fascinating conversation.
Thank you so much.